As of late 2025, ICE is holding more people in detention than any time in its history, with over 70,000 people in custody from New Disabled South on Instagram. From the Disability Visibility Project, quoting Joe Stramundo, quote, "In this political moment, as masked ICE enforcers raid neighborhood restaurants and work sites, while the Medicaid many disabled people need for basic survival is systematically demolished, we must urgently examine the relationship between immigrant rights and disability rights. This is not only because many immigrants are disabled. This is also the deeper issue that ableism, racism, and classism are inextricably bound both in how many people think and in how our society has been structured. Immigration is a disability rights issue and needs to be understood as such by the disability movement." Welcome to R+M Disability, where we discuss how understanding disability culture can and will change your perspective on life. In this episode, let's cover the current administration's attacks on immigrants, specifically how understanding the relationship between the country's stance on disability within culture allows us to gain a deeper understanding of the current situation with ICE and how these two intersect. This will include going over a brief history of the United States culture as it relates to disability, speaking about the existing intersection between disability justice and the work needed to fix the current immigration system, and finally combining those ideas to analyze a case study from this administration.
Chapter 1. A brief history in U.S. culture relating to disability. How ableism was founded into U.S. culture. To begin with, the culture of the U.S. was founded on racism, classism, and ableism the moment European colonizers stepped foot on the indigenous land and began to transform it according to European ideals, philosophies, etc., because they, quote, believed these native peoples, by their nature, did not have the intellectual and emotional capacities granting them equality within Europeans, end quote. The colonization of these native communities built the foundation for modern-day ableism as grounded in this idea of native communities being, quote-unquote, less than Europeans. It ties directly into disability activist Talia Lewis's definition of ableism. Quote, "A system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in eugenics, anti-blackness, misogyny,
colonialism,
imperialism, and capitalism. This systemic oppression leads to people in society determining people's value based on their culture, age, language, appearance, religion, birth, or living place, and then quote-unquote health and wellness, and or their ability to satisfactorily reproduce, excel, and behave." Excuse me if I say this wrong. In Aratsu and Naki's 2024 Law and Review, it states that, quote, "In 1882, Congress first codified the exclusion of defective bodies by declaring that, quote, any lunatic, idiot, or any person unable to take care of him or herself without becoming a public charge was unworthy of admission unto U.S. shores. These ability-based hierarchies remained in today's immigration system, which rewards productivity and educational attainment and high-skilled labor," end quote. This quote goes hand in hand with Columbus's ideas and thoughts about the native population, further perpetuating the idea of disability is simply a hindrance or a problem that needs fixing. We also cannot have the conversation of how ableism was founded into U.S. culture without talking about the slavery in the U.S.
Colonialism.
As an operation of disablement. In
colonialism,
as an operation of disablement, it is said that
colonialism,
by creating a global economic system, also created a global understanding of how we understand the body value. The body value of a slave was directly tied to the person's capacity to labor. The more productive in terms of labor that person could be, the greater value that they were worth, and therefore any kinds of peripheral embodiments that hindered their ability to labor deemed that body of being worthless. And prior to the entrenchment of this global economic system and this belief system, knowledge about the body was instead locally situated within indigenous knowledges. Example of ableism being embedded into U.S. culture. We set the idea of disabled people being less than all the time in media and real-life experiences of disabled people. Seeing a disabled person in a more infantilizing or dehumanizing way simply because we don't understand how they live their life differently than our traces back to
colonialism,
white supremacy, and slavery. This YouTube creator calls on able-bodied people to ask if they've done the following and ask them to examine why they might have done these things. 1. gone up to a visibly disabled person with the assumption already in your mind that they need help without obvious proof. 2. Talk to a disabled person's able-bodied companion about them instead of addressing the disabled person directly. 3. Touch a disabled person's mobility aid without permission. 4. Crouch down like you do when talking to a child when talking to a wheelchair user. The creator provides these examples to show how disabled people are infantilized and minimized in daily life. Understanding and analyzing these quote-unquote seemingly harmless actions have showed the country's current perspective and understanding of disability. The word minimize is especially important term to provide information on how we got where we are today in terms of disability rights and how these experiences dehumanize disabled people enough where organizations like ICE can do what they want to disabled immigrants without accountability. Another example of ableism being embedded into U.S. culture is how modernity today is thought of and how it is accessed from Black and brown bodies/immigrants. This clip from
Colonialism
as an operation of disablement showcases how the effects of slavery are still deeply embedded into our progress as a country.
The capacity of that person to work. What's at stake here is understanding the way in which colonialism not just defines disability and the worth of the body within labour structures, but the way in which modernity today is built on colonial structures that disable. So a lot of the access, mobility and freedoms that we have in the global north are actually interdependent with the disablement of people in the global south who were predominantly doing the resource extraction and manufacturing to sustain consumption levels and quality of life in the global north. Mines, factories, farming, and insecure and precarious labour conditions are just some examples of this that companies really capitalise on in order to be able to keep costs low and to acquire profits.
Both examples show the culture, attitude, and viewing of disability within our culture without citizens even realizing because we do not value disabled lives and bodies. This culture is what affects the people we are about to mention who have unfortunately been victims of this administration within the intersection of immigration and disability.
Chapter 2, Disability Justice as a Frame for Reimagining Our Ableist Immigration System. Pardon me if I say this incorrectly, but Aratsu and Naki in 2024 highlights that ableism, quote, encompasses value being granted or withheld on account of place of birth or residence, a characteristic that is foundational to the present-day immigration system. Importantly, this definition displays how one may be impacted by ableism even if they are not disabled, as individuals are devalued where they stray from perceived ideas of normality and productivity. In order to navigate pathways to the abolition of the current immigration system, one must look at disability justice principles and ideas about society that disabled people have cultivated throughout the years. Disability justice, intersectionality, abolition, and collective liberation. The idea of intersectionality is a fundamental principle of disability justice, as stated above. Immigrants often have overlapping minority identities that put them at more of a disadvantage in the current legal system perpetuated by this administration, as we will examine more when we analyze our case study. Even without the influence of this administration, the way that the U.S. is set up inherently promises violence and mistreatment of minority groups. This means that the only way to avoid these promises is the abolition of them entirely. However, it is not limited to ending spaces and practices of incarceration and policing. Fundamentally, abolition is also about reimagining new ways of life, such that a world in which prisons, policing, and other carceral systems as solutions to social problems becomes unthinkable. Specifically within the idea of immigration, ICE abolition is defined by Vasquez law firm as it, quote, refers to the movement advocating for the dismantling or significant restructuring of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, end quote. By promoting abolition in systems such as the police, we must call for the abolition in all systems enforcing harm upon minority communities, or as seen in Sins Invalids' principle of disability justice of collective liberation, in which, quote, no body or mind can be left behind. Only moving together can we accomplish the revolution we require, end quote. The social model of disability. One important idea that disability studies scholars have brought forward is rejection of the medical pathology model of disability in favor of the social model of disability. Quote, The disability rights movement of the mid-20th century brought with it the social model of disability, which views society and not the disabled individual as defective. In this model, the barriers facing disabled people do not arise solely from their physical limitations, but are instead largely created through standards established by an ableist society." End quote. The emphasis on the social model of disability is especially important to recognize in relation to immigration because it highlights how immigration policies under the current administration transforms a person's medical struggles into social, economic, and legal struggles. Now that we understand the culture, history, and connection between disability justice principles and the reimagining of the immigration system, reviewing the case of Rohingya refugee Nurul Amin Shah Alam helps put these ideas into perspective and shows what happens when someone is present in the intersection between immigration and disability.
The Trump administration is putting up a not welcome sign for some foreigners who want to come to the U.S. A new directive says visas may be denied for people with certain medical conditions, including diabetes or obesity. CBS News foreign correspondent Remy Inocencio explains.
A public service announcement to foreigners hoping to live in America: be healthy or be denied. If you're obese, got diabetes, or because of your age, a new Trump directive basically says you might have a tougher chance getting that U.S. visa. Consular officers around the world have been instructed to ask, could this person someday cost too much in medical care? And if the answer is yes, then that officer could very well decline you. Critics, though, they say it's turning health into a kind of wealth test. Basically, if you can't afford to stay healthy, then you can't afford to be American. But supporters say, hold on, why should U.S. taxpayers foot the bill for someone else's care, which could be lifelong? So it's not because anyone broke a law, but because you might be a burden on America with that high blood pressure, with that asthma, or with that insulin bill. One note, filtering U.S. visa applicants for health reasons is not new. There have been screenings that look for communicable diseases like tuberculosis, along with your vaccine history. But this is an expansion of that, and critics say it's all part of the Trump administration's effort to control immigration into the country. Back to you.
Chapter 3, Case Study. By denying visas for immigrants with certain health conditions, the Trump administration sets up and perpetuates the foundation for discrimination, attacks, and oppression towards disabled immigrants. Shah Alam, a blind refugee, came to the U.S. to escape genocide in his own country and was a father of 3 children. He was originally arrested and had been in local police custody for nearly a year, starting last year, on assault and weapon charges related to the incident in which 2 police officers were injured. His son said his father's arrest last year was due to a misunderstanding with police officers in which Alam was walking using a curtain rod as a walking stick, and he had gotten lost and accidentally walked onto the property of a Buffalo resident who called the police. When the police arrived, they repeatedly requested for him to drop the rod, but since he didn't speak English, he didn't understand their orders and kept repeating, "Sorry." The officers deployed their tasers, and due to feeling threatened, he swung the rod before the officers wrestled him to the ground. According to CNN, quote, 2 officers suffered minor injuries according to the police report, which also said that Shah Alam bit one officer on the arm and another on the hand while they took him into custody. The video doesn't clearly depict that moment, but it shows the officers struggling for some time with Shah Alam and punching him on the head multiple times as they attempt to restrain him, end quote. He was later indicted on felony assault, burglary, and criminal mischief charges. After being released from federal immigration custody around a year later, according to a timeline provided by the Buffalo Police Department, Shah Alam's lawyer reported him missing on the 22nd of February, saying that he had been released to federal authorities on the 19th of February and had no identification. Shah Alam's son told police he believed his father had been held by federal authorities starting on the 19th of February. The Department of Homeland Security said that he accepted a courtesy ride to a Tim Hortons location because, quote, the coffee shop was closer to his home compared to being released directly from the Border Patrol station, and it was determined to be a warm and safe location, end quote. Which is strange, because how does a disabled person who doesn't speak English accept the ride? And why was the family or their attorney not notified to provide a safe way for him to get home?
Period. Oh, SAPAC?
I was just gonna say the letters.
Yeah.
Okay. CAPAC Chair Grace Meng and Rep. Tim Kennedy released a joint statement summarizing the frustrations many have had with this case. Quote, U.S. Border Patrol agents left a man who was nearly blind, unable to speak English, and living with serious medical conditions miles from his home without notifying his family. This decision was a profound failure of duty and basic human decency that cost a man his life. There must be a full and thorough investigation into why this happened. End quote. Buffalo Mayor Sean Ryan added, quote, the Border Patrol officer had no protocol of what to do with a disabled man who doesn't speak English, who's confused and lost. And you know what they did? They dropped him off at a closed coffee shop.
Boo. Oh, fuck. Say unquote.
End quote. We can see how looking at this through the social model of disability helps us look past the propaganda brought forward by the Department of Homeland Security. Instead of viewing this as another unfortunate case of a person dying because of complications arising from their disability, as the department is painting it, we can truly see how our ableist society built the immigration system that firsthand caused this man's death. As the mayor said, the Border Patrol officer had no protocol for this situation, and that is because the system was not built with disabled immigrants in mind. All of this to say that the disabled and immigrant communities are more interlocked than commonly mentioned. Of course, a disabled person can be an immigrant, and an immigrant can be born or become disabled. But we hope this episode stresses the importance of understanding these systems and how they work together and affect some of our most vulnerable communities. We also hope by understanding primarily the social model of disability justice, we can work together to end the terror that our families and communities are experiencing under this administration. Thank you for coming to this episode. R+M Disability will be back to explore the marriage inequality system for disabled people in our next episode coming up, so tune in for next time.